The sky over Geneva turned the color of a bruise, and nobody on the ground knew why, until the sirens started. At 3 in the morning, the alien fleet dropped out of nothing above Earth. There was no warning shimmer, no slow crawl through the outer planets like the movies had always promised. One moment the sky was empty, the next, 41 ships hung in orbit, dark and silent, arranged in a shape that looked less like a formation, and more like a closed fist. Commander Elena Reyes was already awake when the call came. She had not slept properly in 3 years, not since she took charge of Earth Defense Command, and some old soldier's instinct told her that tonight was going to be worse than most. She was pulling on her boots when her phone buzzed against the nightstand so hard it nearly fell to the floor. "Reyes," she said, not bothering with hello. "Ma'am, you need to get to the command center right now." The voice on the other end belonged to Lieutenant Park, and it was shaking. "They're here. The aliens. 41 ships. They just appeared." Elena did not ask which aliens. There was only one kind anyone had been afraid of since the Kessler signal was picked up 11 years ago. A burst of structured radio noise from somewhere past Jupiter that human scientists had spent a decade trying to translate. It had taken years to even confirm it was a language. By the time anyone understood a full sentence of it, the message had already repeated itself 12,000 times. "We are coming. Do not run." "I'm on my way," Elena said, and hung up. She lived 4 kilometers from the command center, an underground complex built into the mountains outside Geneva after the Kessler signal was confirmed. The government had spent 11 years and an obscene amount of money preparing for a day that everyone hoped would never come. Elena had spent 11 years training for it, rising from a mid-level tactical officer to the woman in charge of a defense network that spanned the whole planet, and even now, driving through empty streets with the sky glowing faintly violet above her, she felt her hands shake on the wheel. By the time she reached the command center, half the senior staff were already there, and the big screen at the front of the room was showing a live feed from the orbital telescopes. 41 ships. They were not shaped like anything human engineers would have designed. Long and curved, like blades resting edge up, with hulls that seemed to drink in the starlight rather than reflect it. "Report," Elena said, striding to the center console. Dr. Priya Anand, the head of the signal analysis team, turned from her station with a face gone pale. "They're broadcasting. On every frequency we have. It started 4 minutes ago." "Play it." The room went quiet. A voice came through the speakers, alien and yet unsettlingly close to human speech, deep and resonant, the words carefully shaped as if the alien speaking them had practiced the language for a long time. "People of the world called Earth, we are the Voss Empire. We have crossed a great distance to speak with you. 11 years ago, our listening posts recorded transmissions from your planet, referencing a weapon called Atlas. Records show this weapon has capabilities beyond anything in your visible military. We know you have hidden it from your own people, and from us. We are not here to destroy you. We are here to collect what is owed. Surrender the Atlas weapon within 72 hours, and your world will be spared. Refuse, and it will be taken from your ashes." The message ended. Nobody in the room spoke. Elena felt something cold settle in her chest. She looked around at the faces of her staff, the analysts, the officers, the technicians, who had spent years running simulations of alien invasions that always assumed the aliens wanted resources, or territory, or simple conquest. Nobody had planned for this. Nobody had planned for the aliens to ask for something specific, something with a name. "Atlas," she said quietly. "Does that mean anything to anyone in this room?" Silence. Then Lieutenant Park cleared his throat. "Ma'am, there's a flag on that word in the archive system. Level 9 clearance. It's not showing me anything beyond the name." Level 9. Elena had clearance for most of what Earth Defense Command kept locked away, but Level 9 sat above her, reserved for a small handful of names she had heard whispered but never confirmed. She thought of old rumors, the kind that circulated among senior officers after too many drinks, about a facility on the far side of the moon that nobody talked about directly, about funding that vanished into black budgets for decades, about a program that predated the Kessler signal by years, as if someone in the old government had known something was coming, long before the rest of the world did. "Get me the president," she said, "now." 6,000 kilometers away, in a research facility built into a crater on the far side of the moon, Dr. Marcus Webb was drinking his third cup of coffee of the night when the alarms went off. He nearly dropped the cup. Marcus was 51 years old, with gray creeping into his beard and permanent shadows under his eyes, the kind that came from decades of working somewhere he was not allowed to tell anyone about. He had spent half his life in this facility, more of his waking hours here than anywhere else on Earth or off it. He knew every corridor by heart, every hum and vibration of the ancient machine that slept in the chamber at the base of the crater. He knew it the way a person knows an old friend, not a piece of equipment. He ran. The corridors of the facility were narrow, carved from lunar rock and lined with cables that had been laid down 40 years ago and updated a dozen times since. Marcus had been a graduate student when he first came here, brought in by his mentor, Dr. Sarah Whitfield, on a program so secret that even the paperwork he signed had no real name attached to it. Sarah was gone now, dead 8 years, but Marcus still thought of her every time he stepped into the central chamber, because it had been her voice, and not his, that the machine first learned to trust. He reached the control room breathless, sweat on his collar despite the chamber's careful climate control. 2 junior engineers were already at their stations, faces lit blue by the monitors. "What's happening?" Marcus demanded. "Ships, sir. 41 of them. They dropped into orbit around Earth about 20 minutes ago." The younger engineer, a woman named Ito, who had only been on the project for 2 years, looked up at him with wide eyes. "They're demanding something called Atlas." They said it by name. Marcus felt the floor tilt under him, though it had not actually moved. For 40 years, the facility had operated under the assumption that nobody outside a tiny circle of people knew this place existed, let alone what slept in the chamber below it. The name Atlas had never once, in all that time, been spoken outside these walls. He had personally overseen the encryption protocols that were supposed to keep it that way. Someone, somewhere, at some point, had let it slip, or someone had been listening far longer than anyone realized. "Get me a secure line to Earth Defense Command," Marcus said. "And do not, under any circumstances, run any activation protocols on the chamber. Not yet." "Sir, if they know the name, don't we need to—" "I said not yet." Marcus's voice cracked like a whip, sharper than he meant it, and Ito flinched. He softened, just slightly. "It's not a weapon you switch on, Ito, not the way you're thinking. If we wake it up wrong, in a panic, without explaining what's happening." He stopped himself. He did not finish the sentence, because the truth was complicated in ways he was not ready to say out loud to a room full of frightened engineers. He turned instead to the observation window that looked down into the chamber. 40 meters below, resting in a bed of scaffolding and support cradles built specifically to hold its impossible weight, was the largest single object humanity had ever recovered from beyond its own world. It had been found drifting, dark and lifeless, on the far side of the moon 4 decades ago by a robotic survey mission that had been looking for water ice, and instead found the wreck of something that had clearly once flown among the stars. They had never told the public. The government at the time had made a decision, one that Marcus still argued about in his own head some nights, that the discovery was too dangerous, too destabilizing to reveal. So they buried it, literally and figuratively, and built a research station over the crater where it had settled, and spent 40 years trying to understand what it was. They called it Atlas because it was big enough to hold up a world. The line connecting the lunar facility to Earth Defense Command took 11 minutes to establish, encrypted through channels that had not been used in years, and by the time Marcus's face appeared on the secure screen in Elena Reyes's office, she had already spoken with the president twice and slept not at all. "Dr. Webb," she said, "I need you to explain to me, right now, what exactly is sitting on the far side of the moon, and why aliens 41 ships strong are threatening to burn my planet down to get it." Marcus took a slow breath. He had waited a long time, in a strange way, to have this conversation, though he had never expected the circumstances to be this bad. "Atlas isn't a weapon we built, Commander," he said. "It's a ship, a very old one. It was found drifting on the far side of the moon by a survey probe 41 years ago. Completely dark, no active systems that we could detect. We assumed it was a wreck, a dead machine, until about 6 years into the project, when it wasn't." "When it wasn't," Elena repeated flatly. "It woke up, slowly, over months." It started responding to certain frequencies, certain patterns in the way we spoke to it. My mentor, Dr. Whitfield, was the one who figured out how to actually communicate with it. It's not artificial intelligence the way you'd think of a computer program. It's something else. Something that thinks, and remembers, and has opinions. Marcus hesitated. It told her, eventually, that it had been asleep for a very long time. Longer than human civilization has existed. It doesn't remember everything about where it came from, but it remembers that it was built to protect people. Not conquer them, protect them. Elena stared at the screen for a long moment. And you kept this from the entire planet for 40 years. The decision was made before I was ever involved, Commander. And for what it's worth, I've spent half my life disagreeing with it. Marcus's jaw tightened, but right now, disagreeing about the past isn't going to help us. We have a fleet of alien ships in orbit, demanding we hand over something they believe is a weapon. And I need you to understand that Atlas is not a weapon in the way they think. It's not a bomb. It's not a device you flip a switch on. It is, as close as I can put it, a person. An old, powerful, extremely tired person who has spent 40 years slowly waking up in a chamber under the moon. Can it fight? Elena asked. Her voice was hard, the voice of a woman who had spent 11 years preparing for exactly this kind of crisis and had no time left for philosophy. Marcus paused. I believe so. I've never seen it show that side of itself. But every system we've ever managed to read from its hull suggests it was built for exactly this kind of situation. Defense. War, if it came to that. Then we need to talk to it, Elena said. Today, before that 72-hour clock runs out. It's not that simple, Commander. Make it simple, Dr. Webb. I don't care what it takes. I have a president breathing down my neck, 41 alien ships in orbit, and 71 hours and change before this planet finds out the hard way what, or it will be taken from your ashes, actually means. Elena leaned toward the camera, her eyes hard. You've spent 40 years talking to this thing. I need you to go talk to it again. Tonight. Marcus looked past the camera, through the observation window, down at the vast dark shape resting in its cradle of scaffolding, 40 meters below. In all his years working here, he had never once had to explain to Atlas that the world it was built to protect was under direct threat. He had never had to ask it, in plain terms, whether it would fight. He thought of Sarah, who had died still calling the ship he, out of old habit, still visiting the chamber every week, even after her diagnosis made the walk difficult, still talking to it, like it was family, because, in every way that mattered to her, it had become exactly that. I'll go now, Marcus said. The chamber was cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. Marcus had walked this same path down the access stairs 1,000 times over the years, past the rings of support scaffolding, past the humming banks of sensors that had never fully mapped the ship's interior, until he stood at the base of the crater on the small observation platform they had built directly beneath the vessel's hull. Up close, Atlas did not look like the smooth, sleek warships in old science fiction films. Its surface was scarred, pitted in places by impacts that must have happened long before it ever came to rest here, and threaded through with lines of a material that pulsed faintly with a color Marcus had never been able to name, somewhere between blue and violet, that brightened and dimmed like slow breathing. Atlas, Marcus said, his voice echoing slightly in the vast chamber. I need to talk to you. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the pulsing lines along the hull brightened, all at once, and a voice filled the chamber. It did not come from any speaker Marcus could point to. It simply arrived, deep and calm, carrying a weight that always made the hair on his arms stand up. Marcus, you are afraid. I can hear it in your voice. Something's happened, Marcus said. Something bad. Tell me. He told it everything. The ships in orbit, the message, the demand, the 72-hour deadline, the name Atlas, spoken aloud by strangers from beyond the stars, who somehow knew exactly what to ask for. As he spoke, the pulsing lights along the hull shifted, slowing, deepening in color, until they had gone almost fully violet, a shade Marcus had only seen once before, on the day Sarah told the ship she was dying. When he finished, the chamber was silent for a long time. I know this fleet, Atlas said finally. Not these ships specifically, but I know what they are. I have met the Voss Empire before, Marcus, long before your kind existed. They do not ask for weapons because they wish to disarm a threat. They ask because they wish to collect one. This is what they do. They have done it to others before you, and they will do it to others after, unless someone stops them. Marcus's chest tightened. Stops them how? The lights pulsed once, slow and deliberate, and when Atlas spoke again, there was something in its voice that Marcus had never heard from it before. Not fear, something closer to resolve. You built a home here, Marcus. You, and Sarah, and all the others who came before her, gave me 40 years of patience while I slept, and while I learned to trust you. I was built a long time ago, by people who no longer exist, to protect the small and the new from the large and the cruel. I have been asleep for a very long time, perhaps too long, but I am not asleep now. Marcus stared up at the vast dark hull, at the slow violet pulse tracing lines across its scarred surface, and felt something shift in his chest that was not quite hope and not quite fear, but some strange combination of both. Does that mean you'll help us? He asked. It means, Atlas said, that the Voss Empire is about to learn they should have chosen their words more carefully. They came looking for a weapon. The lights brightened, sweeping across the hull in a slow wave, and somewhere deep within the ship, machinery that had not moved in decades began, very quietly, to hum awake. They are going to find something far worse for them, a ship that remembers exactly what it is, and exactly what it was built to stop. Above the moon, on the small dark screen in Elena Reyes's office, the clock kept counting down. 70 hours, 41 minutes. Back in Geneva, Elena had not moved from her desk in over an hour, listening to the low murmur of officers relaying reports from stations around the globe. Every major city was now under some form of emergency protocol. Airports were closing. Stock markets that had opened briefly in Asia had been suspended within minutes. She had watched footage, briefly, of a crowd gathered outside a cathedral in Rome. Thousands of people standing in silence under a sky that no longer felt like their own, and she had made herself look away, because there was work to do, and no time left to feel any of it properly. Her aide, a quiet young man named Diego who had worked under her for 3 years, appeared in her doorway holding a tablet. Ma'am, the president wants a full briefing in 20 minutes. She's asking whether we have a public statement ready. Tell her we don't, Elena said. Not until I understand what we're actually dealing with. I'm not putting anything in front of 8 billion people until I know if it's true. And if it is true, that we've had something like this hidden for 40 years? Elena rubbed her eyes. She had asked herself the same question a dozen times already, turning it over without finding an answer that satisfied her. Then we tell them the truth, and we hope they understand why the decision was made before either of us was old enough to have a say in it. She looked up at him. Diego, get me everything we have on the history of that lunar facility. Every budget line, every personnel record, everyone who's ever set foot down there. I want to understand exactly what kind of secret we've been keeping. Diego nodded and left, and Elena turned back to the window that looked out over the mountains. Dark now, except for the faint violet glow still visible high above. 41 ships holding their patient, silent formation around a planet that had no idea yet how close it stood to losing everything, or to changing forever. She thought, unbidden, of her own daughter, 12 years old, and staying with her grandmother 200 kilometers away, and wondered if she should call. She decided against it. There was nothing she could say that would make the next 70 hours easier for a frightened child to bear, and pretending otherwise felt like a kind of lie she did not have the strength for tonight. Back on the lunar facility, Marcus sat outside the observation window long after his conversation with Atlas had ended, unwilling to leave, even though there was nothing more to do until morning. The chamber below had gone quiet again. The pulsing violet light settled into a slow, steady rhythm that Marcus had learned, over the years, to associate with something like sleep, or perhaps something closer to deep thought. Ito found him there an hour later, 2 cups of coffee in hand, and sat down beside him without a word. You've been talking to it for 20 years, she said finally. What's it like? Really like, I mean. Not the reports. Marcus considered the question for a long moment. It's like talking to someone who's lived so long they've forgotten most of what happened to them, but never forgotten how they felt about it. It doesn't remember the details of its own history very well. Names, dates, the specifics of who the makers were, or what happened to them. But it remembers, clearly, what it felt like to protect someone. It remembers what it felt like to fail, too, though it's never told me exactly what that failure was. He took a sip of the coffee, grateful for the warmth. Sarah used to say, it reminded her of the oldest people she ever met, the ones who'd lived through real hardship. Not bitter, just careful, in the way you get, when you've learned the hard way, what loss actually costs. Do you think it can really fight an entire alien empire? I don't know, Marcus admitted, but I know it's not going to run, and I know it's not going to let this planet be taken without trying. That has to count for something. Ito was quiet for a while, staring down through the window at the dim shape resting in the chamber below. 40 years, she said eventually. 40 years we kept this secret, and it turns out the thing everyone was so afraid of letting the world know about might be the only reason the world survives the week. Marcus laughed, a short, tired sound with little humor in it. Funny how that works out. They sat together in silence after that, two tired scientists, keeping vigil over something ancient and dangerous, and, in its own strange way, entirely worth protecting, while 70 hours became 69, and the whole world above them held its breath. Neither Elena nor Marcus knew yet just how much was about to change in that time. But far below the lunar surface, in a chamber that had been silent and still for 4 decades, something ancient and patient had finally opened its eyes all the way, and it was no longer interested in staying hidden. By morning, the news had leaked. Not the full truth, not yet, but enough. Someone in the United Nations emergency session had spoken too loudly near an open microphone, and within hours, the words, alien fleet, and 72 hours, were trending across every platform on the planet. Cities that had been calm the night before woke up to grocery stores stripped bare and highways jammed with cars going nowhere in particular, just moving, because staying still felt unbearable. Elena Reyes had not slept in over 24 hours, and it was beginning to show. She sat at the head of the situation table in Earth Defense Command, surrounded by a dozen exhausted officials, watching the countdown timer on the wall tick past the 60-hour mark. The public doesn't know about Atlas, said General Okonkwo Price, the oldest man in the room, and the only one who had been briefed on the lunar project before Elena. And frankly, I'd like to keep it that way as long as possible. If people find out we've had something like that hidden away for 40 years, whatever's left of public trust in this government evaporates overnight. With respect, General, Elena said, I don't think public trust is our biggest problem right now. Our biggest problem, said President Amara Chen, entering the room flanked by 2 aides, is that we have a decision to make, and we have less than 60 hours to make it. She took her seat at the far end of the table, folding her hands in front of her. She looked, Elena thought, like a woman aging in real time. Dr. Webb has confirmed that Atlas is willing to help defend us. That's good news. But I want options on the table. All of them. Including surrender. The word landed heavily in the room. Madam President, Elena said carefully, surrendering Atlas means handing an intelligent being over to a fleet that we know nothing about, based on a threat we can't verify, in exchange for a promise from a species we've never spoken to before yesterday. There is no guarantee they honor that deal even if we comply. I'm aware of that, Commander. I'm also aware that if we refuse, and they follow through on their threat, we could lose millions of lives in the opening hours of a war. We have no way of winning without this ship. I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with before I make any decision, which is why, Chen said, turning toward the door, I've asked Dr. Webb to join us in person. He should be arriving within the hour, by military transport from the lunar shuttle dock. Elena raised an eyebrow. You brought him down from the moon? I want to hear directly from the only person on this planet who's actually spoken to this thing, Chen said. Not secondhand, not through a screen. I want to look him in the eye when he tells me whether we can trust it. Marcus Webb arrived looking like a man who had aged 5 years in one night, his eyes red-rimmed, his uniform wrinkled from the 6-hour shuttle flight. He was escorted straight into the Situation Room, where the assembled leadership of Earth's defense turned to look at him, with the particular hunger of people, desperate for an answer, that would make their decision easier. Dr. Webb, President Chen said. Please, sit. Tell us what we're dealing with. Marcus sat, gratefully, and accepted a cup of coffee from an aide before he began. I want to start by telling you how we found Atlas, he said, because I think it matters for understanding what it is. He told them the story slowly, carefully, the way he had told it to himself 1,000 times over the years, to make sense of his own life's work. 41 years ago, a robotic survey probe mapping ice deposits on the far side of the moon detected a mass anomaly in a crater that should have contained nothing but rock and dust. When a follow-up mission investigated, they found a vessel, enormous, dark, and completely unresponsive, half buried in regolith that had clearly settled over it across a very long span of time. Radiometric dating of the surrounding material suggested the ship had been resting there for at least 12,000 years. The government of the time, faced with a discovery that could rewrite everything humanity believed about its place in the universe, made the decision to bury the story instead. A secret research division was formed. Engineers and scientists were recruited under false pretenses, told they were working on classified defense research, and flown to a hastily constructed facility built directly over the crater. For 6 years, the ship showed no signs of activity. It sat, dark and silent, while researchers mapped its hull, took samples of its strange scarred metal, and slowly built theories about what it might have been. And then it wasn't dead anymore, Marcus said. My mentor, Dr. Sarah Whitfield, was the lead xenolinguist on the project by then. She started noticing patterns in the readings we were getting off the hull, subtle electromagnetic pulses that seemed to shift in response to certain sounds. She had this theory that it wasn't broken. It was sleeping, and she started talking to it. Every day, for months, just talking, like you'd talk to someone in a coma, hoping some part of them could hear you. Elena leaned forward, and it worked. It worked, Marcus confirmed. One day, about 6 years and 4 months into the project, the hull lit up for the first time anyone on the team had ever seen, and it spoke to her. In English. Not perfectly, not at first, but close enough that we knew, beyond any doubt, that whatever this thing was, it had learned our language just by listening to us for years while it slept. President Chen's expression had not changed, but her hands had tightened where they rested on the table. What did it say? Marcus's throat tightened at the memory, secondhand as it was, told to him so many times by Sarah before she died, that it felt almost like his own. It asked her name, and when she told it, it said, "Thank you for staying, Sarah. I was afraid I had been forgotten." Nobody in the room spoke for a long moment. Over the following years, Marcus continued, we learned as much as it was willing to tell us. Its memory of its own origin is fragmented. It doesn't fully understand why, but it believes a very long time has passed since it was fully operational, and that certain parts of its memory were damaged, either through age or through whatever event left it drifting and powerless in the first place. What it does remember clearly is its purpose. It was built by a civilization it refers to only as the Makers, a people who no longer exist, as far as it knows, to serve as a guardian. Not a weapon aimed at conquest, but a shield, raised for species too young or too small to protect themselves. That's a very convenient story for something that wants us to trust it, General Okonkwo Price said, arms crossed. I understand the skepticism, General. I had the same doubts, once, but I've spent 23 years working alongside this ship, and in that time, it has never once given us a reason to doubt what it says about itself. When we asked it to demonstrate weapon systems for testing purposes, early on, before we fully trusted it, it refused. Repeatedly, it told us, and I remember this clearly, that it did not want to teach a young species how to build better ways of killing each other. It has been, in every measurable way, more careful with us than we have been with it. President Chen studied him for a long moment. And now, faced with an actual threat, it's willing to fight. It told me directly, Marcus said, that it recognizes the Voss Empire. Not this specific fleet, but the species, the pattern of what they do. It said they've done this before, to other worlds, other people. They arrive, they identify anything that looks like it could threaten their power, and they take it, by force if necessary, folding it into their own arsenal. I believe, Madam President, that Atlas isn't just willing to defend us. I think it's been waiting a very long time for exactly this kind of fight, because it's the reason it exists. The room was quiet again, the countdown timer on the wall ticking down, unbothered, toward 58 hours. There's something else, Marcus said, more quietly now. Something I think you need to know before you decide anything. Atlas told me the Voss don't just take ships like it and destroy them, or study them for parts. They keep them. They use technology we don't fully understand to control captured vessels like Atlas, to force them into service. If we surrender it, Madam President, we're not sparing our planet a fight. We're handing a fleet of conquerors one more weapon to point at the next world they decide to threaten. President Chen closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, something in her expression had hardened into resolve. Commander Reyes, she said, I want a full defensive posture across every orbital platform we have operational. I want every available fighter wing on standby, and I want to know, in plain terms, what Atlas can actually do, because if we're doing this, I need to understand what we're bringing to the fight. Elena nodded, already reaching for her tablet. Dr. Webb, can Atlas move under its own power? Can it reach Earth orbit in time? I don't know, Marcus admitted. It's never moved, not in the 40 years we've had it. We don't even know if its propulsion systems still function after all this time. But it told me last night that it intends to try. 600 kilometers above the lunar surface, in the drifting silence of the void, one of the 41 Voss ships had broken formation. Aboard its command deck, Marshal Threll stood with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the blue-green curve of Earth through the vast forward viewport. He was old, even by the standards of his own long-lived species, with pale gray skin, marked by the ceremonial scars of 40 years of Voss military service, each one earned on a different conquered world. He had given this same ultimatum 11 times before, to 11 different species, and 11 times it had ended the same way. Fear, followed by surrender, followed by absorption. The pattern was reliable. It was, in its own way, almost boring. Marshal, said his adjutant, a younger officer named Vess, who approached from the tactical station, with visible tension in his posture. We've detected a power signature, on the far side of their moon. Threll turned slowly. What kind of signature? Consistent with the readings on file for the Atlas weapon. Old data, gathered before the humans learned to shield their transmissions. It's active, Marshal. Something down there just woke up. For the first time since the fleet had arrived in this system, something that might have been called excitement crossed the old Marshal's face. He had chased rumors of this weapon across 3 sectors of space, ever since intercepted signals from this backward little world first mentioned a name and a level of power that did not fit a species this primitive. If the rumors were true, if this Atlas was even half of what old intelligence reports suggested, it would be the finest addition to his collection in decades. Prepare a boarding contingent, Threll said. If the humans are foolish enough to activate it themselves, they'll save us the trouble of digging it out of their moon. And send word to the rest of the fleet. He allowed himself a thin, cold smile. Let them know the hunt may be shorter than expected. Far below, unaware of how closely it was being watched, the ship called Atlas continued to wake, its ancient systems groaning back to life one by one, after 40 years of careful, patient rest, gathering itself for a fight it had been built, long before human civilization existed, to win. By the time Marcus made it back to the lunar facility, exhaustion had settled so deeply into his bones that he moved through the corridors like a man underwater. He had been awake for over 30 hours, running on coffee and adrenaline, and the 6-hour shuttle flight back from Earth had done nothing but give him time to worry. He found Ito and the rest of the night shift crowded around the main observation window, staring down into the chamber in stunned silence. Report, Marcus said, forcing his voice into something like authority. Sir, you need to see this, Ito said, stepping aside. Below them, in the vast crater chamber, Atlas was no longer merely pulsing with light. The scaffolding that had held the ship's dormant weight for 40 years groaned audibly under a subtle, growing tension, as if something enormous were beginning, for the first time in living memory, to lift itself. Along the ship's scarred hull, panels that had been fused shut for 4 decades were shifting, sliding open with a grinding sound that echoed up through the chamber like distant thunder, revealing structures beneath that no human eye had ever seen. Marcus, Atlas said, its voice filling the chamber, and for the first time since he had known it, there was an edge in that voice that sounded almost eager. I need you to evacuate this facility. All personnel. I do not know precisely how much power I still have, or how long it has been since I last moved under my own strength. I do not wish for that uncertainty to cost any of you your lives. You're leaving, Marcus said, and it was not a question. The fleet above your world already knows I am awake. I felt them notice, the way you feel a shadow fall across your face. They will move quickly now. I do not intend to give them the chance to reach me while I am still buried. The lights along the hull brightened, sweeping in long, slow waves that reminded Marcus, absurdly, of a person stretching after a very long sleep. I am going to rise, Marcus, and then I am going to place myself between your world and anyone who comes to take it. This is what I was built for. I have waited a very long time to remember that clearly. Marcus felt his chest tighten with something he had not expected, some strange mixture of grief and pride, the same feeling he imagined a parent might have watching a child leave for a war neither of them had chosen. Will you be all right? There was a pause, longer than usual, filled only by the low groan of ancient machinery stirring after decades of stillness. I do not know, Atlas admitted. But I would rather find out, fighting for something worth protecting, than remain buried in this crater as a rumor the Voss Empire chases across the stars. Evacuate your people, Marcus, and then, if you are willing, I would like you to be there when I rise. Sarah stayed with me until the end. I think I would like a familiar voice with me when I begin again. Marcus wiped his eyes quickly, before anyone could see, and turned to the room. Everyone out. Emergency evacuation, now. Ito, get the shuttle prepped. All non-essential personnel go first. He looked back down through the observation window, at the vast, dark shape beginning, for the first time in 12,000 years, to truly move. I'm staying. While the facility emptied around him, Marcus took a moment, alone in the corridor outside the control room, to open a small drawer he had not touched in years. Inside, wrapped carefully in a cloth, was an old identification badge, faded and cracked, with Sarah Whitfield's photograph still visible beneath the scratched plastic. He had kept it since her funeral, unable to throw it away, unwilling to display it anywhere he might have to explain it to visiting officials. He tucked it into his jacket pocket now, feeling foolish and sentimental, and not particularly caring either way, and made his way back toward the observation window. Through the glass, he could see the chamber transforming below, decades of dust and settled debris sliding away from the ship's hull as it shifted and stretched, like something waking from the world's longest sleep. He thought about the first time Sarah had brought him down here, a nervous graduate student barely out of his 20s, and how she had stood exactly where he stood now, watching the same dark shape with an expression of quiet, patient hope that he had not understood until years later, when he finally heard the ship speak for himself. I hope you can see this, he murmured, not entirely sure if he was talking to Sarah, or to Atlas, or simply to the empty corridor around him. I hope wherever you are, you know it worked. The floor trembled again, harder this time, and somewhere above him, dust began sifting down from a ceiling that had not moved in 4 decades. Marcus straightened his shoulders, tucked the badge deeper into his pocket, and went to find a viewing position that would let him watch Atlas rise without getting caught in the collapse of the old scaffolding. In Geneva, President Chen had called a second emergency session, this one smaller, limited to the handful of officials who now knew the full truth about Atlas. The countdown clock on the wall read 57 hours as she addressed the room. I want to be very clear about something, she said. What we decide in the next few hours is going to be studied for the rest of human history, assuming we have one to study it in. I will not have this decision made in a panic, and I will not have it made without every voice in this room being heard. General Okonkwo Price spoke first. Madam President, with respect, I still believe surrender should remain on the table. We do not know this creature's true capabilities. We do not know if it can actually stand against 35 ships. If it fails, we've thrown away our only bargaining chip for nothing. And if we surrender it, Elena countered, we've handed a captured, weaponized guardian to an empire that Dr. Webb tells us has done this before, repeatedly, to other worlds. We're not just gambling with our own safety, General. We'd be gambling with whoever the Voss decide to threaten next, using a weapon we handed them ourselves. That is not our planet's responsibility, Okonkwo Price said, though his voice lacked its earlier certainty. Isn't it? President Chen asked quietly. If Atlas is telling the truth about what it was built for, and what the Voss intend to do with it, then I think it becomes exactly our responsibility. the moment we understand the choice in front of us. She looked around the table, at the tired, frightened faces of people who had spent their careers preparing for threats that had always, until now, remained theoretical. I've made my decision. We do not surrender Atlas. We stand with it, and we prepare our own defenses to support it however we can. I want that decision logged, and I want everyone in this room to understand that I am the one who will answer for it, not any of you. Nobody argued further. Around the table, heads nodded, some reluctantly, some with visible relief, and Elena felt the weight in her chest ease, just slightly, now that the decision had finally been made. Above them, 40 meters up through solid lunar rock, the sky was still dark and quiet, the alien fleet still holding its patient, watching formation around a planet that had no idea how close it was standing to the edge of everything changing all at once. The countdown clock in Geneva ticked past 56 hours. And in a crater on the far side of the moon, something ancient and patient finally began, after 12,000 years, to rise. The evacuation took 11 minutes, which Marcus later thought was either the fastest or the slowest 11 minutes of his life, depending on which part of it he remembered. Ito and the rest of the staff filed into the emergency shuttle bay in tight, controlled lines, the training drills they had run 100 times finally proving their worth, while the ground beneath the facility trembled with a deep, steady rhythm, like something enormous slowly finding its footing after a very long sleep. Marcus stood at the observation window until the last shuttle had cleared the docking bay, watching the small craft peel away from the crater's edge and vanish into the dark toward the safety of the far side relay station. Then, alone in the control room except for the quiet hum of monitoring equipment nobody had time to shut down properly, he turned back to the window and watched. Atlas was rising. The scaffolding that had cradled the ship for 40 years fell away in pieces, support struts the size of buildings groaning and buckling as the vessel shifted its true weight for the first time since it had settled into this crater 12,000 years ago. Dust and loose regolith cascaded down the crater walls in slow, silent waterfalls, kicked up by the ship's movement even in the moon's thin gravity. The scarred hull, once still and cold, now blazed with light along every seam and panel, violet and blue tracing intricate patterns that Marcus had spent 20 years trying and failing to fully map. "Marcus," Atlas said, its voice carrying a strain he had never heard in it before, though it was steady, controlled. "I would suggest you hold on to something." He barely had time to grab the edge of the console before the entire facility shuddered, a deep resonant boom rolling up through the rock itself, as something ignited far below, and then, impossibly, the ship began to lift free of the crater floor entirely, rising through the shattered remains of the ceiling that had been built around it, up into the black lunar sky, scattering debris and dust in a slow, silent storm around it. Marcus watched through the cracked observation window, heart hammering, as the vast dark shape of Atlas cleared the crater rim, and hung, for a long moment, silhouetted against the stars, larger than anything humanity had ever built, larger than most of the buildings on Earth laid end to end. Then, without any sound to carry across the vacuum, it began to move, gathering speed, arcing up and away from the lunar surface, toward the blue curve of Earth, hanging in the black sky beyond. "I am with you, Marcus," Atlas's voice said, softer now, coming through the facility's remaining comm systems rather than filling the chamber directly. "I have linked myself to this station's communication array so that you may speak with me as I travel. It will take me approximately 40 minutes to reach Earth orbit at current acceleration. I suggest you use that time to reach your own transport and follow. I do not wish to fight this battle without a familiar voice nearby, if you are willing." Marcus was already moving, sprinting for the last shuttle held in reserve for exactly this kind of emergency, laughing despite himself, a strange giddy sound, born from exhaustion and fear, and something that felt, absurdly, like joy. "Wouldn't miss it," he said. "Try not to get yourself blown up before I catch up." "I will do my best," Atlas replied, and Marcus could have sworn, impossible as it was, that there was something like humor in that ancient voice. He found Ito and the last handful of evacuated staff already strapped into the reserve shuttle, faces pale, eyes fixed on the small viewport that showed the receding lunar surface. Ito shifted over to make room for him at the controls, and Marcus dropped into the pilot's seat, hands moving through the pre-flight sequence on pure muscle memory, built over years of emergency drills nobody had ever expected to actually use. "You sure about this?" Ito asked quietly, as the shuttle's engines began to hum beneath them. "We could hold position here. Wait for word. I've spent 20 years talking to that ship through a reinforced window 40 meters underground," Marcus said, guiding the shuttle up out of the ruined docking bay and into open space. "I'm not about to let the first time it actually fights for something happen without me close enough to see it." He glanced at her. "You don't have to come. I can drop you at the relay station." Ito shook her head, jaw set. "It let us live here for 2 years without ever once threatening any of us. I'd like to see how this ends too." The shuttle cleared the crater rim and rose into the black sky, Earth a brilliant blue crescent ahead of them, and behind it, growing steadily brighter, the scattered lights of 41 alien ships holding their formation, waiting. Below on Earth, word of the awakening reached beyond the situation rooms and secure channels far faster than anyone in Geneva would have liked. A civilian astronomer in Chile, tracking the alien fleet through an amateur telescope out of nothing but stubborn curiosity, caught the moment Atlas cleared the lunar horizon on camera, and within 20 minutes, the footage was circling the globe, grainy and shaking but unmistakable. A vast, dark shape rising from the moon itself to meet an invading fleet. In Geneva, President Chen watched the same footage looping on a secondary screen, her expression unreadable. "I suppose the truth was never going to stay contained past today anyway," she said quietly to Elena. "Better the world sees this than hears some sanitized version of it from us 3 days later." "Do you want me to prepare a statement?" Elena asked. "Not yet," Chen said. "Let's see how the next hour goes first. I don't want to promise the world a miracle before I know whether we're actually going to get one." On the main tactical display, the icon representing Atlas continued its steady climb toward Earth orbit, and around the globe, in living rooms and public squares and crowded broadcast studios, billions of people who had spent the last day and a half preparing for the end of everything watched, for the first time, something that looked less like an ending and more like the very beginning of an answer. In Geneva, the situation room had gone from tense to something approaching chaos. "Confirmed visual from the lunar relay station," Lieutenant Park called out, his voice cracking with disbelief as the feed populated across the main screen. "It's moving. Ma'am, it's actually moving." Elena Reyes stared at the screen, at the vast, dark shape rising away from the moon's surface, trailing a faint corona of light along its hull, and felt something she had not allowed herself to feel in the past 36 hours of crisis meetings and worst-case scenarios. "Hope. How fast?" she asked. "Accelerating steadily. Projected arrival in Earth orbit in 38 minutes. Park's fingers flew across his console. "Ma'am, the Voss fleet has noticed. Multiple ships breaking formation, moving to intercept." President Chen, who had not left the situation room in over 12 hours, stood slowly from her chair, eyes fixed on the screen. "Get me eyes on the Voss response. I want to know exactly what we're looking at." The room worked in controlled, practiced motion, officers relaying orders, analysts pulling data, the machinery of Earth's defense apparatus grinding into motion around a single vast shape crossing the gulf between Moon and Earth. Elena watched the tactical display update in real time, red icons marking the Voss ships breaking from their patient orbital formation, moving to converge on a single point in space, where Atlas's projected path would cross theirs. 6 ships moving to intercept, Park reported. The rest are holding position around the planet. "They're being careful," General Okonkwo Price muttered, "testing the waters before they commit the whole fleet." "Smart," Elena said grimly. "If Atlas turns out to be everything Dr. Webb thinks it is, they don't want to lose their whole force finding out the hard way." President Chen's jaw tightened. And if it isn't? Nobody answered that question. On the screen, the 6 Voss ships continued their slow, deliberate approach, and the dark shape of Atlas continued its climb toward Earth, unhurried, unbothered, closing the distance 1 steady kilometer at a time. Down in the situation room, President Chen had quietly stepped away from the main table to take a call from the leaders of 3 other major governments, each demanding to know why they had not been briefed on Atlas before this moment. Elena caught fragments of the conversation as she worked, Chen's voice calm and measured, even as she explained, again and again, that the decision to keep the program secret predated her own administration, and that right now, Saving lives mattered more than assigning blame. When Chen returned to the table, her expression was tight but composed. "They're not happy," she told Elena quietly. "None of them are happy. But for now at least, everyone's agreed to hold their own forces back and let this play out. Nobody wants to be the one who complicates whatever chance we actually have here." Elena nodded, eyes fixed on the tactical display. "Small mercies. I'll take them where I can get them," Chen said, and turned back to watch the screen alongside her. Aboard the Voss flagship, Marshal Threll watched the approaching object with an expression that had shifted, over the past 20 minutes, from cold anticipation to something closer to genuine curiosity. "Size estimate," he said. "Difficult to determine precisely, Marshal," Vess replied from the tactical station, his voice tight with barely restrained tension. "Our scanners suggest a length comparable to 3 of our own capital ships, end to end. Composition is unusual. Readings don't match anything in our database. The hull material appears to be actively repairing minor damage as it moves." Threll's eyes narrowed. Self-repairing hull material was not a technology his empire possessed, nor had he encountered it in any of the 11 conquests that had built his reputation. "Age estimate? The decay signatures in the material suggest, Marshal, the numbers don't make sense. If our instruments are correct, this vessel predates recorded Voss history by several thousand years." The bridge went quiet. Threll had spent 40 years hunting rumors of powerful artifacts scattered across a dozen star systems, had personally overseen the capture and subjugation of 3 vessels comparable in power to anything his own empire could produce. But nothing in his experience prepared him for the idea of something this old, still functional, still capable of independent movement, after what should have been an impossibly long dormancy. "This is exactly why we came," Threll said finally, a slow smile spreading across his gray, scarred face. "Something this valuable, this rare, sitting unclaimed on the doorstep of a primitive species that doesn't even understand what they have. Prepare the capture protocols. I want it disabled, not destroyed. Whatever this human weapon is, it belongs in our collection, not in a crater of ash." "Marshal," Vess said carefully, "our intercept ships are closing to engagement range now." "Good," Threll said, settling back into his command chair, eyes fixed on the growing shape on the main view screen. "Let's see what this ancient thing remembers about fighting." Marcus's shuttle broke free of the lunar relay station's shadow, just in time for him to see, through the small viewport beside his seat, the moment the first shots were fired. The 6 Voss ships had arranged themselves in a loose net formation around Atlas's projected path, and as the massive ancient vessel closed the final distance, they opened fire in near-perfect unison, streams of blue-white energy lancing across the black void, toward the ship that Marcus had spent half his life coming to think of as family. He gripped the edge of his seat, breath caught in his throat, as the bolts converged on Atlas's hull, and stopped. A shield, vast and shimmering, faintly visible only as a rippling distortion against the starfield, absorbed every single shot, the energy dissipating harmlessly across a barrier that had not been visible at all until the moment it was tested. On the shuttle's comm channel, Marcus heard Ito, several seats back, let out a strangled sound that was half sob and half laugh. "That was rude." Atlas's voice came through the shuttle's speakers, calm, almost conversational, though Marcus could hear the low hum of enormous power gathering somewhere beneath the words. "I introduced myself quite politely to your Marshal Threll's ships, and this is how they respond. I suppose old habits do not change quickly, even across 12,000 years." On the tactical display feeding into Marcus's shuttle from the lunar relay station, he watched the 6 Voss ships regroup for a second volley, more coordinated this time, clearly recalibrating after the failure of their opening attack. And then he watched Atlas respond. It did not attack the way Marcus had expected, not with the raw destructive fury he had half imagined from decades of half-formed theories about the ship's dormant weapon systems. Instead, thin lances of pale light, precise and controlled, speared out from points across Atlas's hull, striking not the Voss ships' hulls directly, but the space immediately around their engines, their weapon ports, disabling systems with a surgical precision that left the ships themselves largely intact, drifting and powerless, rather than reducing them to debris. "I told you, Marcus, I do not enjoy teaching a species better ways to kill." Atlas said, its voice carrying that same strange thread of dark humor. "But I have had 12,000 years to consider how to stop a fight without ending a life unnecessarily. It seemed worth remembering, given the circumstances." The remaining Voss ships, now drifting and disabled, broadcast frantic signals back toward their flagship, and Marcus watched on the tactical display as the rest of the Voss fleet, holding position around Earth, began to stir, engines flaring to life across all 35 remaining ships. "Atlas," Marcus said into his comm. "The whole fleet's moving, all 35 ships." "I see them," Atlas replied, and for the first time, something in its voice shifted, hardened, the ancient patience giving way to something colder and more deliberate. "Marcus, I need you to reach Earth orbit and get to a safe distance. This is no longer a demonstration. Marshal Threll is about to learn precisely what kind of ship he decided to hunt." In the Geneva Situation Room, the tactical display had become a storm of red and blue icons, the entire Voss fleet now converging on a single point where Atlas hung in space, having just disabled 6 of their ships without firing a single lethal shot. "My God," Lieutenant Park breathed, staring at the screen. "It didn't kill them. It could have, and it didn't." "Focus, Lieutenant," Elena said, though she felt the same strange lump rising in her own throat. 40 years, humanity had hidden this thing away, out of fear. And here it was, offered mercy to an enemy fleet within minutes of first contact. Status on the main Voss force? 35 ships, moving to full engagement. Projected contact with Atlas in 6 minutes. Park's hands were steady now, the earlier panic burning away into focused urgency. "Ma'am, should we scramble our own fleet? Put something in the sky in case Atlas needs support?" Elena looked to President Chen, who had not moved from her position at the head of the table, eyes fixed on the screen with an expression Elena couldn't quite read. "Send them up," Chen said quietly. "Not to fight, not yet, but I want our people ready, and I want the Voss Empire to see that Earth stands behind whatever that ship is about to do. If this is the day the rest of the galaxy learns who we are, I don't want them to think we hid behind a machine and did nothing ourselves." Elena nodded, already relaying the order, feeling something settle in her chest that had been absent for 36 brutal hours. Not certainty, not safety, but purpose, sharp and clear, the kind she had trained her whole career to answer. On the screen, the full might of the Voss Empire's local fleet closed in on a single ancient ship hanging silently between them and the world it had sworn, 12,000 years and 1 crater on the moon later, to protect. Around the planet below, the first squadrons of Earth's own defense fleet began rising to meet them, small and outmatched, and utterly unwilling to stand aside. 40 minutes after rising from its resting place for the first time in 12,000 years, Atlas turned to face the entire weight of an empire that had crossed the stars to claim it, and did not retreat. Marcus watched from his shuttle, close enough now to see the ancient vessel with his own eyes, rather than through a camera feed, and felt Ito's hand grip his shoulder tightly as the first wave of the full Voss fleet began its approach. "Whatever happens," she said quietly, "I'm glad we got to see it wake up. Even if this is as far as it goes." Marcus did not answer right away, his eyes fixed on the massive shape hanging steady and unafraid between the gathering fleet and the small blue world it had chosen, after 12,000 years of silence, to call its own again. "It's not as far as it goes," he said finally, with more certainty than he had any right to feel. "I know that ship. It didn't wait 40 years just to lose in the first hour." Below them, the countdown clock in Geneva that had once measured the hours until humanity's possible destruction, now felt, strangely, almost irrelevant, replaced by a different kind of waiting entirely. The tense, breathless anticipation of a whole world watching to see whether the thing it had hidden away in fear for 4 decades was about to become the reason it survived. The battle that followed would later be studied by military historians on Earth for generations, though none of them would ever fully agree on how to describe what they saw in those first critical minutes. Some called it a battle. Others, more honestly, called it a lesson. Marshal Threll's 35 remaining ships converged on Atlas in a wide, sweeping pincer formation, the same tactic that had broken the will of 11 other species before this one. Overwhelming numbers, converging fire, the psychological weight of an entire fleet bearing down on a single target, designed to make even the bravest defenders question whether resistance meant anything at all. Atlas did not run. Marcus. The ship's voice came through the shuttle comm as Marcus watched, wide-eyed, from a safe distance alongside the small evacuation convoy from the lunar facility. I would like you to know that whatever happens in the next several minutes, I do not regret rising. Please tell the others, if I am unable to. Don't talk like that, Marcus snapped, gripping the edge of his seat so hard his knuckles went white. You're not dying today. Not after we just got you back. There was a pause, and then, quieter, almost fond, Atlas said, No, I do not believe I am, but it seemed important to say. The Voss fleet opened fire in a coordinated wave, 35 ships worth of weapons fire converging on a single point in space, and for one terrible heartbeat, the entire view screen washed out in blinding blue-white light. When it cleared, Atlas was still there. Its shields, the same rippling distortion that had absorbed the first probing attack, now blazed with visible strain, patterns of light racing across the barrier, like lightning trapped beneath glass, but it held, absorbing an attack that would have vaporized any 3 ships in Earth's current arsenal combined, and then Atlas moved. It did not move like the sleek, darting fighters humanity had built, nor like the lumbering capital ships of its own considerable size might have suggested. It moved with a strange, fluid grace, as if 12,000 years of dormancy had done nothing to dull whatever instincts had once made it a weapon capable of frightening an empire. It slid sideways through the Voss formation, weapons lancing out in precise, economical bursts, striking engines and weapon arrays with the same surgical restraint it had shown the first 6 ships, disabling rather than destroying, ship after ship going dark and drifting as the battle unfolded. It's not killing them, Elena Reyes said in the Geneva Situation Room, watching the tactical display with something between awe and disbelief. 9 ships disabled in the first 90 seconds, and it hasn't destroyed a single one. It's toying with them, General Okonkwo Price said, though his voice had lost its earlier skepticism, replaced now with something closer to reluctant respect. No, it's not even that. It's not trying to prove a point. It's just doing what it was built to do. On the main view screen, the Voss fleet's coordinated attack pattern began to fracture as Marshal Threll's ships, faced with an enemy that refused to behave the way 12 previous conquered species had behaved, scattered into more cautious, disorganized formations. The empire that had crossed the stars expecting a straightforward collection mission was, for the first time in Threll's 4 decades of service, encountering something it did not know how to fight. Aboard the Voss flagship, Marshal Threll's earlier excitement had curdled into something colder. Status, he barked, gripping the arms of his command chair as another wave of reports flooded in. Ship after ship reporting disabled weapons, crippled engines, crews shaken but alive. 12 ships disabled, Marshal, Vess reported, his voice tight. No casualties reported. It's deliberately avoiding lethal strikes. I don't care if it's being polite about it, Threll snapped. I care that a single vessel is dismantling my fleet like it's swatting insects. Bring the warden online. Vess hesitated, just for a moment, a hesitation that in another officer might have earned a reprimand. Marshal, we've never deployed it in an engagement this uncertain. The risk of... Bring it online, Threll repeated, quieter now, colder. If this ancient relic wants to remember what it once was, let it remember exactly what it is now up against. Deep within the flagship's hold, in a chamber built to contain something far larger than any standard weapons bay, restraints the size of bridges disengaged, with a series of heavy, grinding clangs, and something vast and dark began, reluctantly, to stir. Marcus felt it before he understood what it was, a strange pressure behind his eyes, a wrongness in the way the light from the battle seemed to bend at the edges of his shuttle's viewport. Marcus. Atlas's voice came through, and for the first time since it had woken, there was something in it that sounded, unmistakably, like fear. They have brought out the warden. What's the warden? Marcus demanded. Another one of us. Atlas said, and the words landed like a physical blow. Another vessel built by the makers, long ago, for the same purpose I was. I do not know how the Voss captured it, or how long ago. but I recognize its signature the way you would recognize the voice of someone you grew up beside. It is being forced to fight, Marcus. It is not choosing this. On the tactical display, a new shape emerged from the belly of the Voss flagship, smaller than Atlas but no less imposing, its hull dark and scarred, in ways that made Marcus's stomach turn when he understood what he was looking at. Not scars from age and battle alone, but scars that looked deliberate, controlled, threaded through with veins of harsh red light, utterly unlike the calm blue-violet that traced Atlas's own hull. They put something in it, Marcus said slowly, understanding dawning with a sick weight in his chest. A control system. They're forcing it to fight. Yes, Atlas said. This is what the Voss do, Marcus. This is why they hunt vessels like us across the stars, not to destroy us, to break us, and then wear us like a weapon pointed at whichever world offends them next. I do not know how long the Warden has endured this. I do not know if there is enough of who it once was left to reach. Can you reach it? Talk to it, like you talk to us? There was a long pause, filled only by the distant flashes of continuing battle on the view screen. I do not know, Atlas admitted. But I am going to try. Please, Marcus, keep the shuttle at a safe distance. Whatever happens next, I do not want your death added to the weight of this day. The Warden surged forward, red light blazing along its scarred hull, and struck Atlas with a force that made the ancient ship's shields ring like a struck bell across every sensor within 100,000 kilometers. In Geneva, the Situation Room had gone utterly silent, every eye fixed on the main screen, as the two ancient vessels collided in a battle unlike anything human tactical analysts had ever modeled. What is that thing? President Chen said quietly, not really a question, more a statement of dread. Dr. Webb is reporting it's another vessel like Atlas, Lieutenant Park said, voice hushed, captured, controlled. The Voss have been doing this for a long time, apparently. Ma'am, this changes everything we thought we understood about the threat level here. Elena watched the two shapes grapple across the tactical display, Atlas's measured, precise strikes, now meeting something wild and desperate and clearly, terribly powerful in return. Can Atlas win this? I don't know, Commander, Park admitted. I don't think anyone does. On the screen, Atlas took a strike along its port side that sent bright fractures of light racing across its shield barrier, and for the first time since it had risen from the moon, Marcus's voice came through the command channel, tight with something close to panic. It's hurting, Marcus said. I can feel it in how it's talking to me. It doesn't want to hurt the Warden back, but it's not holding anything back either, and it's not enough. Elena's hands curled into fists at her sides. Get our fleet in position to support. I don't care about the odds. We're not standing here watching that thing fight alone. The battle between Atlas and the Warden stretched across nearly 10 agonizing minutes. 10 minutes in which the rest of the Voss fleet, still disabled or too cautious to re-engage after the earlier losses, hung back and watched their captured weapon do the work they no longer trusted themselves to do directly. In Geneva, the Situation Room watched in helpless silence as the battle stretched on, each new strike from the Warden landing harder than the last, each response from Atlas more measured, more restrained, as if the ancient ship were holding something back, even as the damage to its own hull mounted visibly on every screen. Why isn't it fighting back properly? General Okonkwo Price demanded, gripping the edge of the table. It's letting itself get torn apart. Because it doesn't want to kill it, Elena said quietly, understanding dawning, even as she said the words aloud. Look at the strike patterns. Atlas has had a dozen chances to disable the Warden the same way it handled the first 6 ships. It's not taking them. It's trying to reach whoever's still in there instead of just winning the fight. President Chen's hands were clenched tight on the table's edge. Can it afford that? Mercy is admirable, Commander, but not if it costs us the battle. Elena did not have an answer for that. On the screen, Atlas absorbed another crushing blow, its shields flaring bright red with strain, rather than their usual calm blue. And for the first time since the ship had risen from the moon, Elena felt real fear return to sit heavy in her chest. Please, Atlas said, its voice carrying across open comm channels now, not just to Marcus but broadcast wide, desperate, a plea rather than a threat. I know you are still in there. I know the Makers built us the same way, gave us the same purpose. Whatever they have done to you, Whatever control they have forced into your systems, I know it has not erased what you were built to be. Please, hear me. The warden struck again, red light blazing, and Atlas took the blow without returning it, shields flaring bright and dim under the strain. I am not your enemy. Atlas continued, quieter now, almost gentle, even as its own systems groaned audibly under the accumulated damage. The people below us, on that world, they gave me 40 years of patience while I slept. They spoke to me like I was someone worth speaking to, long before they knew whether I could answer. I believe you deserve the same chance. Whatever is left of you, I am not going to stop reaching for it, even if it costs me everything I have left. For a long moment, nothing changed. The warden drew back for another strike, red light gathering along its hull with terrible intensity. And then, impossibly, it stopped. The red light flickered, once, twice, threading through with sudden veins of pale blue that fought against the harsh crimson glow like dawn breaking through storm clouds. On every screen tracking the battle, from Marcus's shuttle to the Situation Room in Geneva, to the panicked bridge of Marshal Threll's flagship, the warden hung motionless in space, its weapons falling silent, its hull trembling with some internal struggle no outside observer could fully understand. There you are, Atlas said, and this time there was no mistaking the emotion in its voice, something raw and overwhelmed and profoundly relieved. There you are. I have you. Aboard the Voss flagship, Marshal Threll rose from his command chair, staring at the view screen with an expression that had finally, for the first time in this entire encounter, cracked into something like genuine alarm. Re-establish control on the warden, he snapped. Now. Marshal, Vess said, voice shaking. The control signal isn't responding. Whatever that other vessel is doing, it's... Marshal, I don't think we have the warden anymore. The red light along the captured ship's hull guttered and died entirely, leaving only the pale blue-violet glow that now matched Atlas's own, and slowly, deliberately, the warden turned in space to face the Voss flagship that had held it prisoner, for reasons and for years, that none of the humans watching would ever fully learn. Marshal Threll, Atlas said, its voice carrying across every open channel in the system, calm now, and cold in a way it had not been before. I believe you have some very difficult decisions to make in the next few minutes. You came here to collect a weapon. Instead, you have lost one, and gained the attention of a species I do not think you fully understand yet. I would suggest, very strongly, that you consider your next move with great care. On the tactical display in Geneva, the warden's icon shifted from hostile red to a cautious, uncertain neutral, and beside it, Atlas held its position, scarred and strained but unbroken, between the freed vessel and the remaining ships of an empire that had just watched, in real time, the collapse of a strategy that had never once failed them before today. Aboard Marcus's shuttle, the sudden silence after 10 minutes of continuous, terrifying battle felt almost louder than the fighting itself. Ito had not let go of his shoulder the entire time, and now she slowly released her grip, staring at the viewport with wide, disbelieving eyes. It talked it down, she whispered. It actually talked it down. Marcus wiped a hand across his face, realizing only now how tightly he had been clenching his jaw. That's what it does, he said, his voice rough. That's what it's always done, even with us, in the beginning. It never once tried to force anything. It just kept talking, kept waiting, until whoever it was speaking to decided to listen. He looked out at the two ancient shapes hanging together in the dark, one scarred with age, the other scarred with something far crueler, both now glowing the same steady blue-violet. I think that might be the most powerful thing about it, not the weapons, that. On the comm channel, Atlas's voice reached them, quieter now, some of the earlier strain audible beneath its calm. Marcus, Cora tells me she can feel your shuttle nearby. She would like to know if the small ship watching is the same one who kept me company while I slept. Marcus felt an unexpected lump rise in his throat. Tell her yes, he said. Tell her it's the same one. She says thank you. Atlas relayed after a moment. She says it has been a very long time since anyone thought to keep her company at all. Aboard the Voss flagship, the mood had shifted from cold command to something bordering on barely restrained panic. Vess had abandoned his tactical station entirely, and now stood near Marshal Threll's chair, his usual composure cracked. "Marshal, the rest of the fleet is requesting orders. 6 ships report critical damage to their retreat capability. If Atlas and the Warden move against us directly, we do not have the numbers to withstand a coordinated attack." Threll said nothing for a long moment, staring at the 2 ancient vessels on his view screen, at the calm, steady light now shared between them. 40 years of conquest, and he had never once faced a situation where the weapon he came to claim turned, of its own will, entirely against him. "Recall the boarding parties," he said finally, his voice flat. "Consolidate the fleet at standby range. We are not retreating yet, Vess, but I want no further provocations until I understand exactly what we are dealing with." "And the Warden, sir?" Threll's jaw tightened. "The Warden," he said slowly, "is apparently no longer ours to command." He turned away from the view screen, unwilling to watch any longer the sight of 400 years of careful, brutal control unraveling in the space of 10 minutes. "Get me a secure line to the Empire's high command. They are going to want to hear about this personally, and I would rather they hear it from me than from whatever story spreads once this reaches the wider galaxy." Elena Reyes stood slowly from the situation table, staring at the screen, at the 2 ancient shapes hanging together in the dark above her world, and felt the first real flicker of certainty she had allowed herself since the sirens had woken her 2 nights ago. "Get me a channel to Atlas," she said. "I think it's time Earth said something to this Marshal directly." The channel opened across every screen in the Voss flagship's command deck, and across every screen in Geneva, at the same moment, a single feed, carrying Elena Reyes's voice, out into the vacuum, where Marshal Threll stood, for the first time in 40 years of conquest, uncertain of his own next move. "Marshal Threll," Elena said, standing at the head of the situation table, her exhaustion buried beneath a calm she had spent 11 years learning to project, even when she did not fully feel it. "My name is Commander Elena Reyes, Earth Defense Command. I understand you came here looking for a weapon." There was a pause before Threll's voice came back, rough and controlled, the voice of a man recalculating everything he thought he understood about the day. "You understand incorrectly, Commander. I came here to collect what belongs to the Voss Empire by right of discovery. That right has not changed. 2 of your own officers might disagree," Elena said. 12 of your ships are currently disabled and drifting, and the weapon you were counting on to finish this fight just chose, on its own, to stop obeying you. I don't think right of discovery means quite what you thought it meant an hour ago." Silence stretched across the channel, filled only by the faint hum of open comms, and the distant static of 2 fleets still holding position, weapons ready, waiting to see which way this moment would break. "Marshal Threll," Atlas said, its voice joining the channel, calm and steady despite the visible damage, still tracing bright fractures across its hull, on every tactical display. "I would like to introduce you to someone. The vessel you called the Warden has a name of its own, one it has not been permitted to use in longer than I can calculate. It has asked me to share it with you now, so that you understand precisely what you have lost today." A new voice entered the channel, hesitant, rough with disuse, carrying an accent that was not quite like Atlas's careful, practiced English but close enough to understand. "My name is Cora," the voice said. "I was taken from my post 412 years ago, by your empire's count. I have fought in 11 campaigns I did not choose, against 11 peoples I never wished harm. I remember all of them. I remember every world your empire took from someone who had done nothing to deserve it." Threll's face, visible on the flagship feed now patched through to Geneva, had gone pale beneath its gray, scarred skin. "I am done fighting your wars, Marshal." Cora continued, and though the voice remained level, there was an unmistakable weight of 4 centuries of grief pressed into every word. "And I do not believe I am the only one who has been waiting a very long time for the chance to stop." President Chen, standing now beside Elena at the head of the situation table, spoke into the open channel for the first time. "Marshal Threll, my name is Amara Chen. I lead the government of this world. I want to make something very clear to you, and to whatever remains of your empire watching this exchange. Earth was never your weapon to take, and based on what your own captured vessel has just told us, we are not the only ones your empire has wronged, to build the fleet currently sitting in our sky. You are a single primitive world," Threll snapped. though the confidence in his voice had thinned considerably. "You do not understand the scale of what you are threatening to oppose." "Maybe not," Chen said, "but I understand this. You crossed an unimaginable distance to threaten billions of people over a rumor, expecting us to fold the way. Apparently, 11 other worlds have folded before us. We didn't, and I don't think you have the numbers left in orbit right now to make us." The tactical display told its own story. One Threll could not argue against even if he had wanted to. 12 of his ships disabled. His most powerful asset, the vessel he had used to break the will of a dozen worlds, now standing openly against him. And above the planet he had come to threaten, Earth's own defense fleet, small and outmatched on paper but present, unwavering, rising to meet whatever came next. "Marshal," Atlas said, quieter now, almost gentle, the way it had once spoken to a dying woman it had loved as family. "I knew people like you once, a very long time ago, before I was left drifting and forgotten for 12,000 years. Empires rise on the belief that anything not strong enough to resist them deserves to be taken. They rarely survive contact with something that simply refuses to believe that in return. I am giving you the chance to leave this system with the ships you have left, and the people aboard them. I would not recommend testing whether I extend that offer twice." In the Situation Room, Elena watched the exchange with her heart pounding, aware that the next few seconds might decide not just the outcome of this encounter, but the shape of humanity's entire future among the stars. She glanced at President Chen, who gave the smallest of nods, silent permission to let the moment play out without interruption. On the tactical display, small icons marking the Voss fleet's remaining operational ships shifted subtly, engines flaring in preparation, though whether for renewed attack or retreat, nobody in Geneva could yet tell. Elena found herself holding her breath, watching Marshal Threll's face on the shared visual feed, searching for some sign of what he would choose. "He's calculating," General Okonkwo Price murmured, "trying to decide if there's still a version of this where he wins." "There isn't," Elena said quietly. "I think even he knows that now." For a long, taut moment, nobody spoke. On the bridge of the Voss flagship, Threll stood motionless, his gaze moving across the tactical display, across the wreckage of a strategy that had never failed him in 40 years of service, across the quiet, unshakable presence of two ancient vessels standing side by side against him. "This is not over, Commander," Threll said finally, though the words carried more bitterness than conviction. "The Empire will hear of this." "I imagine they will," Elena said. "I imagine word travels fast, out there among the stars. Something tells me you're not going to be the only fleet who hears about what happened today." Threll gave no reply. On the tactical display, the remaining Voss ships began, slowly and without further threat, to withdraw, gathering their disabled vessels for recovery, their weapons powering down as they turned away from a planet that had, in the space of a single terrible night, refused to become what every other world before it had become. The days that followed passed in a blur that Elena Reyes would later struggle to fully remember in order. The public learned everything, all at once, the 40 years of secrecy collapsing under the sheer impossibility of hiding a 12,000-year-old alien vessel that had just saved the planet in full view of half its orbital telescopes. There were investigations and hearings, and no shortage of furious questions about what else the government might still be hiding. Elena answered what she could and referred the rest to people above her pay grade, grateful, for once, that the hardest decisions of the crisis itself were already behind her. Marcus Webb found himself, somewhat to his own bewilderment, thrust into the role of humanity's primary point of contact with two increasingly curious ancient minds, a job he had done quietly and alone for 20 years, and now found himself doing in front of cameras, committees, and eventually, representatives from a dozen other nations eager to understand what Atlas and Cora actually were. Cora, for her part, spent the first several weeks mostly silent, healing in ways that had nothing to do with her hull, tethered gently alongside Atlas in a slow, careful orbit above the Earth, while the two ancient vessels spoke to each other in low frequencies human instruments could barely register. 400 years of stolen memory, slowly, painfully, being shared and processed and grieved. Engineers from a dozen countries petitioned for access to study both vessels, and after long negotiations, Atlas itself insisted on a simple condition before agreeing to any of it: that Cora's wishes be respected above all else, and that no human team approach her without her own consent first, freely given, never assumed. President Chen agreed without hesitation, and the new protocol became, quietly, one of the first laws humanity ever wrote, specifically for the rights of a being that was not human at all. Elena found herself visiting the observation platform more often than her schedule strictly allowed, drawn by something she could not quite name, a need to simply witness, in the quiet moments between crises, the strange and unlikely peace that had settled over the planet since the battle ended. She was there the day Cora spoke for the first time to someone other than Atlas or Marcus, a hesitant, careful greeting extended to a group of visiting school children, whose teacher had petitioned for months for the chance to bring them close enough to see the ships with their own eyes. "Hello," Cora had said, her voice warm despite its unfamiliar cadence, and the children had gone utterly silent with wonder, and Elena, watching from the platform railing, had felt something in her chest loosen that had been tight since the night the sirens first went off. "She is remembering herself," Atlas told Marcus, one quiet evening as he sat in the small observation module that had been hastily built to allow direct, close conversation with the two ships now orbiting Earth. "It will take time. 400 years is a long time to be someone else's weapon, but she is remembering, and that is more than she had an hour before we met." "And you?" Marcus asked. "How are you doing, after everything?" There was a pause, warm and thoughtful, the kind Marcus had learned over the years to recognize as Atlas actually considering the question, rather than simply answering it. "I am tired," Atlas admitted. "More tired than I expected to be, after so long a sleep, but I am also, for the first time since I can clearly remember, exactly where I am meant to be. You gave me 40 years to remember who I was before I needed to become it again, Marcus. I do not think I could have faced Marshal Threll's fleet with any courage at all, if Sarah had not spent 6 years simply talking to me like I mattered, long before either of us knew I would ever need to fight for anything." Marcus felt his throat tighten, the way it always did when Sarah's name came up. Grief and gratitude tangled together in a knot he had long since stopped trying to untie. She'd be glad to see this. All of it. Even the parts that scared everyone half to death. "I believe she would," Atlas agreed. "Though I suspect she would also tell you to get some proper sleep, Marcus. You look terrible." He laughed, surprising himself, the first real laugh he had managed in what felt like weeks. Not everyone on Earth was ready to celebrate. In the weeks following the battle, Elena sat through committee after committee, hearing after hearing, facing questions from furious lawmakers who wanted to know why a discovery of this magnitude had been kept from the public for 40 years, and why the decision to risk the entire planet on an untested alien vessel had been made by so few people, in so little time. She answered every question honestly, even the ones that made her look foolish, even the ones that made the government look worse. There was no version of the truth, she had decided early on, that was better than simply telling it plainly, and letting people be angry if they needed to be. Trust, she told President Chen more than once in those difficult weeks, was not something you rebuilt by managing the story. It was something you rebuilt by refusing to manage it at all. Slowly, painfully, the anger gave way to something more complicated. Gratitude, mixed with lingering suspicion. Curiosity, mixed with fear of what else might still be hidden in old classified programs nobody outside a handful of officials had ever heard of. Marcus found himself testifying more than once before international panels, explaining, again and again, the strange story of a girl named Sarah, who had simply refused to stop talking to something the rest of the world had written off as a dead machine. Why did she keep trying? One panelist asked him, during a particularly long session. 6 years, with no response at all. What made her believe it was worth the effort? Marcus considered the question carefully before answering. She used to say that anything patient enough to wait 12,000 years to be understood deserved someone patient enough to try, he said. I didn't fully understand what she meant until years after she was gone. I think I understand it now. 6 months later, Elena Reyes stood on a newly constructed observation platform outside Geneva, watching a small delegation shuttle rise toward the 2 ancient vessels now permanently stationed in high orbit above the planet they had chosen, in the end, to call home. Earth's relationship with the wider galaxy had changed, with a speed that still left most of humanity dizzy, contact requests arriving from a handful of other species who had, it turned out, heard the story of a small, primitive world that had refused to hand over its weapon and had somehow, impossibly, won. Not every message had been friendly. Not every species out among the stars shared Cora's grief or Atlas's patience, but enough had reached out with curiosity rather than threat that President Chen had established an entirely new branch of government just to manage the flood of first contacts, something nobody could have imagined necessary a year earlier. "You look thoughtful," Marcus said, joining Elena at the platform railing, 2 cups of coffee in hand, one of which he passed to her. "Just thinking about how close we came to giving up on all of this," Elena admitted, accepting the cup gratefully. "If Chen had decided to surrender Atlas that first night, if we'd folded the way every other species apparently did before us, none of this would exist. Cora would still be a weapon pointed at someone else's world, and we'd have handed a fleet of conquerors something even worse than what they came looking for." "We didn't, though," Marcus said. "That's what matters." Elena watched the small shuttle dock against Atlas's massive, scarred hull, now repaired, its violet-blue light steady and calm against the black of space. Somewhere up there, Cora's own light traced similar patterns beside it, the 2 ancient guardians keeping watch together over a small blue world that had, against every reasonable expectation, refused to be afraid of what it did not yet understand. "Do you think this is really over?" Elena asked. "The Voss Empire, I mean. Threll said it himself. This isn't finished." Marcus considered the question for a long moment, watching the shuttle's running lights blink against Atlas's hull. "No," he admitted. "I don't think it's over. I think this is just the beginning of something a lot bigger than any of us really understand yet. But for the first time in my whole career, Commander, I'm not scared of what comes next." "No?" "No," Marcus said, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he actually meant it. Because whatever's coming, we're not facing it alone anymore. And I don't think Atlas or Cora are the last old, patient, powerful things out there who are tired of watching empires like the Voss decide who gets to be afraid. Above them, in the quiet dark of Earth's orbit, 2 ancient guardians who had waited 12,000 years and 400 years respectively for someone to simply talk to them like they mattered, kept their steady, patient watch over a small, stubborn world that had chosen, when given the chance to surrender, to stand instead. And somewhere out among the stars, word of what had happened above a backward little planet called Earth was already beginning to spread, carried on old frequencies and older rumors, reaching ears that belonged to species who had, for a very long time, been waiting for a sign that empires like the Voss could actually be made to answer for what they had taken. In the months that followed, 3 more requests for contact arrived from worlds humanity had never heard of, cautious messages from species who had caught fragments of the story secondhand and wanted, carefully, to know if it was true. President Chen's newly formed contact office answered each one personally, slowly building the first threads of a wider relationship with a galaxy that had, until recently, existed only in humanity's imagination. Cora, for her part, chose in the end to stay in Earth's orbit alongside Atlas, rather than seek out whatever remained of wherever she had first been taken from. When Marcus asked her why, gently, during one of their long evening conversations in the observation module, she had answered simply that 400 years was long enough to spend fighting other people's wars, and that she had decided she would rather spend the next several hundred learning, slowly and without pressure, what it felt like to simply exist somewhere she was allowed to choose for herself. "Besides," she added, with something that might almost have been humor, "Atlas tells me your coffee, whatever that is, sounds worth staying to try, once Marcus finally builds us a way to understand taste." Marcus had laughed so hard at that he nearly spilled his own cup over the observation platform railing, and Elena, standing beside him, had found herself laughing too, for the first time in longer than she could easily remember, under a sky that no longer felt quite so frightening as it had 6 months before. Earth had not asked to become a sign to the wider galaxy that empires like the Voss could be made to answer for what they had taken, but it had, in the end, chosen to become one anyway. And far above the world it had sworn, once again, to protect. Atlas watched the stars turn slowly overhead, Cora's steady light glowing beside its own, and for the first time in 12,000 years, felt no fear at all about what the future might bring.